going to talk about doing a still life in watercolor. We're going to focus on brush work, looking at shapes of value and color mixing. So I have a little still life set up here, and I'm going to just kind of make a frame on my watercolor paper or my sketchbook to kind of so you have an idea of where everything goes. You start out by blocking in real lightly exactly where the things are going to go. Now you're going to find I'm going to change that red bowl in a minute, but now obviously I've sped this up. And as you work, you're going to find a need to figure out angles. And do you see how I held my pencil up there? That helped me with the angle of that book going back. That's called sighting. So I'm constantly comparing where the apple is compared to the lemon and how tall it is compared to the bowl. You notice I'm also drawing in my cast shadows, and right there I drew in a color shape. That's the lighter area of that apple. So I'm looking at the shapes. Now you see where I actually had to change that bowl a little bit because it was a little too low as I work through it. But I didn't draw real hard, and I can always go back and erase a lot of my lines. Think about your color shapes. A color or value shape would also be your cast shadow. If you look now, coming back and erasing some of the extra lines and reinstating, now that is a darker area, I'm seeing that as a shape, and then the lip of the bowl has a light area, so I indicated that. Don't need too many details, but that's going to help you a lot as you work. Now you're going to stop the video right now and set up your own still life. Overlap objects, okay, that will create unity, and have different sizes of shapes and different heights of things. You should have 4 or 5 things. Right here I'm showing you that I never use black or brown paint. I've already said that. I'm starting out with a wash, a wet and wet wash, so that's just water in the background. And I'm going to mix kind of a cool color, and you can see that the still life has a violet, a blue violet, and I'm not doing all those little details and patterns in there. And I'm just laying in a light color. The paint or color is only going to go where you have it wet. Now my painting here is vertical, so I have just enough paint to keep it from dripping, and you can see how I control it a little bit with a tissue or a paper towel or a rag. I'm not sure what that is. And I'm laying in just a light value in the negative space or the area around the actual objects. And the cloth comes up in front of that red bowl. And I'm going to let it dry a little bit and blot some things up. And now I'm going to start with the basic color. Now that's a really bright red, so I'm going to add a little teeny bit of green to it, just a little bit, and see how that oranges it up or dulls it. And we practice this a little bit. So that's where you start using those color exercises that we've done. So I'm laying in some color, and now notice I didn't outline, adding a little green. That was a little dark, but that apple does have some yellow green in it. And while it's still wet, I come in with a little bit of a wet brush and soften those edges. And then I start laying some more color in there. Now again, this is sped up, so I'm not painting as fast as it looks. Now at the same time, while it's still wet, I'm laying in my cast shadow, and that will anchor them together. That will give it more of a weight, and we'll go back in with some darker value in there later. Now this is where you start using those color shapes that you drew. It helps you remember that the apple's not all one color. You can see, and we'll look at it again in a minute, where the really dark darks are. And sometimes you have to step back and look at it and blur your eyes and look for those super dark values, which should all be in a shape or connected to each other as well. So again, it's kind of the same process, a little bit of a wet brush to soften those. And you can see where it bled into the background, but it doesn't matter right now. I probably could have let it waited a little longer, but the bleeding doesn't bother me, and you'll see in a minute a drip out actually happens, and that doesn't bother me either. So now I can come in with some darker color. That means, and to make a color darker, we've practiced this, you just use less water. Coming in with a little bit of a detail, making some of those lines go in the direction of the apple, kind of contouring and make curve like around the apple instead of straight up and down. Now my favorite part is drawing that lemon, painting that lemon. Yellow's really hard. You have to be careful not to get it too heavy or thick because it gets opaque or not transparent really quickly. Now add a little bit of oranges in there to create my value or my volume, and see how they're connected to each other, so it kind of makes a shape. I'm not just putting spots all over. I'm kind of connecting them and also connecting them to my cast shadow and even bringing some blue into the actual lemon. See that shape? The color and value shape is what you should be doing and thinking about. Now the edge of this bowl is really light and the inside of the bowl is kind of dark. And right now I'm just using some bright reds and I soften it. And I see where I lost a little bit of that lightness. So if you clean your brush and have it somewhat dry, you'll see in a minute that I'll come back around that edge at the front of that bowl and lighten it. While it's still wet, you can actually lighten some things. So now I'm looking for some darker values. My cast shadow. And some dark values in the cloth, which should be painting kind of the whole thing at one time, going back and forth from object to the book, to the cloth. Now the binding of the book is very dark, and then there's a piece of cloth that goes back on the top of the book that's the same value, but the light's hitting it, or the same color. The light's hitting it, so you leave it a little bit lighter. More water makes it lighter. Popping back into that apple now that it's dry, I can have less water on my brush and more color. Again, moving around the painting, stepping back and deciding what needs to be done. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about. Look how dark those values are. They get really dark at times. So now with that little black and white picture that I made, I know that I need to have some of my values darker. The apples are as dark as the bowl, and whoop, there's drip. That's okay, it doesn't matter. But the lemon is very, very light, and the top of the book is very, very light. So what I'm doing now is I'm coming back in and darkening the background to make the book lighter. And there, right there is what I was talking about. See where I kind of lighten that area with a clean, drier brush? The brush is just a little bit wet, and it lifts it, the color off. Can't scrub it or anything, but it does lift it. A little more color back there to pop the edge of that bowl. I can't lighten it anymore, but I can darken the background or the negative space. And your details come last, and that's going to create a little more form. Details should always be last. You start general and work up to it. So we're looking at brushwork, the shapes and color and the values, and your color mixing.